All right, so I'm going to start oils, and I'm going to take my Walnut Alkyd Medium and just pour it out onto my palette. I don't like to use a cup for my Walnut Alkyd Medium itself. That would probably be smarter. But every time I use a cup, I forget to clean it, and it just gets gunkier and gunkier. And then over time, it starts to ball up and add to my paint, and I don't like that. So oil painters, you do what works for you. You don't have to do it the way I do it, where I just drop it down. And anybody who needs some, Dana, you're welcome to borrow it. I'm going to start with a bigger brush and just lay in some value first. And just like I've done before, I'm just going to do big shapes, no detail to start. And I'm not going to worry about any of the little nitpicky stuff. So maybe to start, what I'll do is I'm just squinting my eyes and looking at my resource now. Maybe I'll do some of the darks around the outside edges. And anybody have a preference for the color, where I should go with it?
I like orange.
Orange on the inside. Here's what I'll do. I'll mix it up from what I have on my papers. I'll do orange on the inside of the flower and the blues around the outside edge because those are complementary colors, and I kind of like that idea. So that's what I'm going to do. Thank you. Okay, so on the outside, I'm going to do kind of bluish tones. So I'm going to start. I might start with a bigger brush than that one. I know, live band. All right, so I just dipped my brush in the walnut oil, just regular walnut oil, to get it ready to go because it hasn't been used in a while. And I'm going to mix kind of a bluish grayish tone, and I want it to be really dark. I'm adding a little bit of that walnut alkyd to it because it's my first layer of paint. So it's a mix really of mostly blue with a little bit of that the brown. And I'm going to squint my eyes and just look at the shapes.
Are you looking at the black or white or the color?
I'm looking at the negative space, which is the color around the flowers.
Okay.
You don't have to, and I did not tell you to do this for this workshop, but in your studio, it helps to have 2 of each brush, because now if I have big areas of light, I might want a clean brush so this dark pigment doesn't get mixed in with it. And I don't want to have to clean my brush thoroughly between each value. So it can help to have a dark brush and a light brush of each size. Right now, what I want to do though is I'm going to go in and start painting the darks of that center of that rose. And I'm going to do it in some, what we've decided is going to be some orangey tones. I'm just going to clean off that palette because I don't need that color anymore. And even though this blue towel is dirty, I can still just open it up and keep using it for a while. So I'm just going to get that brush wet to start. Wipe it off. I've still got my Walnut Alkyd Medium. I'm going to mix some of my red with some of my yellow. But here's one thing I'm going to point out, you guys. For that dark value right in the center, see that dark value right there? Just the orange alone isn't going to cut the mustard. It's just not dark enough. But I want to keep the color fairly warm because inside a petal, the thing that's happening and why those colors look yellowy inside of there is there's a hint of yellow in the white of the flower, and inside the petals, the colors are all bouncing around within each other, but they don't have any extra light coming in, so you see the yellows and the oranges. So I'm going to darken it by adding some brown to keep the color warm. If I wanted to darken it with blue, it would cool down the color. So I'm adding brown. So the center of my flower, let's see. I'm going to say as being kind of like here. Ish. And there's a whole other flower up here too. I'll have to go back into that one later. But for now, I'm just going to deposit that just that center part there. And then I'm going to clean off my brush. I am. Sorry, I keep looking at you squinting too for a second. I squint all the time. The whole time. Because if I don't squint, I get too mired in the details and I just want a general region. When I squint, I just see the dark values. In fact, I'm even going to make this kind of rounded in there. So kind of see that. Now I'm just going to lighten it up a little bit. So some yellows added to this kind of, browny color. but I want to orange it up a little bit, so I'm adding some red. And I'm going to lighten it up a little bit with some white. The minute I add the white, it goes a little too pinky, so I got to add some more yellow in there. So anytime you add white to a color, you have to reevaluate the color. As soon as I did, it just got too light. So I'm going to start taking this color again. This was just I added some red and yellow to the color mix I already had. And I'm squinting my eyes still to try and figure out where some of these values are. And roughly just kind of throw them in. But no perfection. Okay, so I'm only focusing on this one main flower to start because everything is relational. I'm gonna start with this one flower and then I'll do the other flowers around it. And if I do this one flower right, I shouldn't have to put much detail in the other flowers. My brain will automatically assume there are other flowers. Plus this is the one with the main detail in it anyways. So I'm just gonna keep working on this one flower. I'm gonna start lightening up my value. I'm still a little bit yellowy, so I'm just gonna add some more white and yellow with a touch of red to that color. Again, I went too far with the red. So I'm going to add more white and yellow to my color just to get lighter. And again, I'm squinting. Right here, some of these darks, they're just outside the nucleus. The nucleus, the tight bud of the flowers, all the oranges and yellows, just outside that nucleus where those petals fold out. Can you see that color? It's kind of a greenish gray color. That's the color I'm talking about right now. So I'm going to take some blue and some yellow and mix them together. And what happens is I get a really happy green color. Really, really, really happy. Not quite right, especially when I have all these oranges here. So I'm going to take some brown to dull that down. I'm just going to try it on there. Really dark value, maybe lighten it up a smidge. So I'm going to take some more white. And maybe I'll add a little bit more blue to cool it. And I'll just have to throw it in there and then see if it works or not. It might not work. We'll find out. I'm going to lighten it a little bit for the bottom one that I see right here, because I think that's a little lighter. So that and that. This one here I see as being a little bit warmer, this darker one, now that I look at it a little closer. So again, I'm squinting my eyes. I'm going to add more brown to that color. Maybe even a touch of my yellows. And I'm scrubbing the paint in a little bit just to keep it a little bit thinner in that area. So can you see the correlation between the darks here and inside the petal? It's hard because all those lighter petals around it. I'm not worrying about any of those lighter petals yet. I'm putting in the darks. And here's why I like to do it this way. It seems confusing, right? But when I put in the lighter petals on top, I can fudge it a little bit and the colors underneath will shine through. So I'll show you that in a minute. So I'm just going to instead go towards some of these other darks on the outside edge of the petals and the insides of the petals. These are the grayer tones that are on those outer petals. What I see there is, again, just some grayish blue tones. If I go to my oranges and I add them to my green, or sorry, to my blue, that'll start to help. So that's a mix of that red and that yellow. And this one I might mix a bigger batch with my palette knife. And I'm so sorry, you guys, my glass palette I was using for something else, so I couldn't bring it tonight. And this palette is so dirty. I know it's hard to see the color. So I apologize for that. I'm gonna take some white. Notice I grabbed a nice big batch. This is quite a light value, even though it's not white. And I'm gonna grab some orange and mix it right beside it. So yellow and red. Mix those together. I'm gonna grab some of my blue. And I'm just gonna start mixing some blue and white. Look at how happy and pure that color is. A color is never more pure than when it's in the tube. Once you start mixing it with stuff, it starts to dull down or mint out or whatever. So I'm mixing some blue in there, but obviously that's not gonna work. It's just too vibrant, so I've got to dull it down. I could use some orange, see what happens there. I went a little too far, so I'm gonna add some more of that white and blue back into it, just a little bit at a time, until I get to a color I'm happy with. That's starting to work much better. Because now I've got, it's almost like it turned purpley, slightly purpley, but it's still got that blue in it. I can go a little bit bluer if I want to. And I'm sure this is gonna be too dark. See how dark that is?
Is that when you use that plastic thing on top?
Yeah, this plastic acetate for. I can paint a little bit on there and see right away, ooh, it's way too dark. So I'm gonna add some more white. Normally I would have cleaned my palette knife on before I grabbed some white. Bad, bad, bad. Add a little bit more blue. And if you ever get to a point where you've got a really big batch and you know you're gonna have to lighten it a lot, just take a little bit of it. Start a new batch. Add some more white to it. See where you go from there. All right, now I'm gonna try that. Much better. Because if it disappears, then you know you're on the right track. Okay, so I'm gonna take that brush. I'm just gonna load it up. A little bit of Walnut Alkyd still, because it's still on that first layer. I'm gonna go around these outside edges. These are just the outside edges of those petals. So you can see against the blue now, it looks really gray, but it's a bluish purpley color. Anytime I go near a wet color, I've got to be careful that I'm not contaminating my brush too much. Now, before I start painting some of my lighter petals and such on top, what I want to do is just create a little bit of a darker outline around some of these other spaces on the outside edge of that flower. So I'm just going to take some of this kind of, I see some greens in there, so I'm just going to take some of these greens that I've mixed. So at this point now, my colors are all going to get lighter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just taking, I'm going to use my other palette knife here. I'm going to take my palette knife and start mixing it in with some of the color I had. So the orangey yellow, mix some yellow in with it, some white in with it, pardon me, to try and mix a really light, warm, buttery yellow, but I also want a slightly darker buttery yellow. So again, my yellow was kind of an orangey color. I changed it from the original. So I'm not painting the exact same colors as in the sample painting, but it actually might end up being closer than I think, because I think that some of these tones are in there. So what I'm doing with oil, I can pre-mix some color right off the get-go. I can take some of this orangey color and pre-mix my lights and my darks. With acrylic you can too, but you just have to make bigger piles because they dry quicker. Okay, and then I'm going to do some cool ones too. So I'm going to take a bunch of cool color and some white and mix them together to get a really light cool as well. Okay, so I'm going to start with some of these buttery. I'm actually going to lighten it. I'm going to merge these two. All right, so now when I start to paint on top of wet paint, I have to get thicker paint on my brush, and I can't add any walnut oil to it anymore, so, or walnut oil alkyd, so I'm going to wipe that off. And I'm just going to start going in and adding some of these outside edges of petals. I'm just using solid paint, and I'm just starting to lighten some of them now. So the only way to really layer something on top of a wet paint is to get really thick paint, lay it on and kind of just leave it. Wipe your brush off, get more paint, do another stroke, leave it, wipe it off, get more paint. The more you play in the paint, the more things are just going to blend together. So I'm still not using white. This is still a kind of a warm color. All this white area I can start to get rid of with some of this color that I've been going into here a little bit. So I'm still in the really like warm side of the flower right now, the warm half.
How literally do you stick to the petal formations?
I don't.
Okay.
I'm not at all sticking literally to it. I'm using this as a guideline, but I'm not counting petals. That would make it no fun at all. I just want the general idea. I mean, if I see like I've got too much of that that dark in there, I can always creep into it. If I need to add in some, you know, more of the dark, I can always do that later too. But I'm just right now kind of getting rid of, you know, some of those values and kind of giving the hint of some petals. But I don't have to go in and create every little bit of the petal. If I put all those darks in first and then I go in and around them, creating some light lines, it starts to feel like there's some massive petals. I'm not doing a lot of fussing with each one. I'm literally just loading the brush pretty heavily and just kind of dragging it, and then that's the rounded edge of a petal. I'm going to let everything else down here inside kind of do its own thing, visually giving it the appearance as though it's doing more. I want to get lighter and lighter as I go towards the outside, and I'm also going to start adding some of these grays a little bit more too. So I might start mixing some of the grays with some of these yellowy orangey tones too. If I've got a value just too dark, I can just rub it off and try and go back in again and lighten it up. And I've really got to scoop it. And I usually work the biggest brush and then get smaller as I go. I'm just going to mix into my bright color again some more white. And I want it almost pure white, just very little bit of color. But rarely do I go pure white out of the tube. Pure white out of the tube is just so cold. I always like to mix it with something. So now I can go in with that really light, and I can squint my eyes again. When I squint my eyes, nothing in the center is really, really light. In fact, I'm just going to soften up this stuff a little bit before I go in there. But what I see as being really light when I squint my eyes are some of these outer petals. So maybe like in here. And you can lay them in and just leave them. You don't have to always go in and soften the edge. You can leave it as a nice big thick goopy bit of paint. Or you can soften it strategically. Now, if I want to, I can take any one of the brushes I've already been using and soften them. You can also get, some people will use a fan brush to soften, but I find a fan brush has that perfect rounded edge, so you always get that round mark when you're softening. I like kind of like a makeup brush, and then you can softly just kind of go over and just gently kind of move the paint a little bit to soften it. You're still gonna have to wipe it off here and there, but it just kind of gently softens or blurs edges here and there. Some I want more than others. Sometimes it's only one edge that might be softened. You might leave the other edge hardened. But this kind of a brush, you still have to wipe it off in between. And you can just use it to soften up a little bit. Really what you're doing when you're painting with oils or acrylic, but especially oils when they're really thick and goopy like this, you're just pushing paint around. It's kind of like sculpting with paint. Okay. Now I could nitpick this. Sometimes it's better if you don't nitpick it. But really quickly, before I set you guys off on your own, and I would probably go in there, I'll just go in real quick and I'll just establish a couple more of my darks. And I'm using a slightly brighter orange color, just to make sure I bring back in some of that orange. I'm just going to put in the hint of a couple other flowers as well. Because sometimes you don't have to do all the detail in every single flower. Sometimes if you just do the detail in one flower, that might be all that you need to do. Okay, there's the hint of that flower. I wouldn't do that much more to this flower. The only thing I might do is soften the edge. So see this edge here on this flower? It's pretty hard. It goes straight from lighter to darker. What I might do is do something like this, where I just kind of take a soft brush and flick some of that light out into the dark. It's hard to see from there probably, depending on your glare. So it just kind of gives it that almost like a glow, and just pushes it back a little bit. Some of these other flowers that we have in there, I might even just, you know, add like the hint of some of the dark in the center, like I did before.